Debt validation. Collection agencies. Debt validation, the ultimate weapon against the about it in one of three ways. If a collection account comes into your life, you've heard 1. It came up as a listing on your credit report. Or 2. You received a telephone call from a collection agency. 3. You got a letter in the mail. You could try to settle the debt with a collection agency, but you might want to try debt validation first. The best defense against debt collectors is often debt validation. Why? Because the collection agency may not even be legally entitled to collect the debt from you, Joe, Bob, and money borrowed. Let's say you borrowed money from your friend Joe. Joe would be the creditor of this debt, the original creditor, and, let's say time has gone by and you think you might still owe Joe money, although you're not sure how much. One day, a guy named Bob comes up to you and says that he is collecting the money that you owe Joe. Bob is acting just like a collection agency for a credit card company would act. Think about it. Having never met Bob before, would you just hand over your cash to him? No. Or at least I hope you would not. You should have these questions in mind to ask Bob. What legal document exists to prove that Bob is legally authorized to collect money for Joe? How much is the actual debt? What payments have already been made on the account? Where is the accounting of the debt, including all interest and fees? Are these fees and interest amounts legitimate? Do I really owe Joe the money? You remember borrowing money from your friend Sam. At the same time, you remember paying one of them back the next day. Is this the debt you borrowed from Sam or from Joe? Where is the contract showing the terms of the loan with Joe and the contract with Sam? At the very minimum, you should phone Joe or Sam to ask about the loan. You should have the same thoughts about a collection agency who sends you a bill for a debt you that may or may not owe. Don't panic if you receive a phone call or a letter from a collection agency. Your first reaction may be to panic. Calm down and think about the situation. Ignore all of the fancy language and legal terms that the collection agency uses to collect. Think of what questions you would ask Bob in our example. If you do, you'll know exactly what to ask a collection agency. Bob, in our example, to validate an alleged debt. The Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. Debt validation is a legal procedure which is spelled out by the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, or FDCPA. It matters if the alleged claim is from the original creditor, Joe, or collection agency, Bob. The FDCPA does not cover collection tactics used by original creditors, like credit card companies who issue credit cards. It only governs the actions of debt collectors, collection agencies. Let's look at the definition of these two groups as defined by the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, FDCPA, Title 8, Debt Collection Practices, Section 803, Definitions 15 U.S.C. 1692 Al. 4. The term creditor means any person who offers or extends credit creating a debt or to whom a debt is owed, but such term does not include any person that receives an assignment or transfer of a debt that is in default solely for the purpose of facilitating collection of such debt for another. This means that, as far as the FDCPA is concerned, a creditor is the original entity which loaned money to a consumer. The collection agency is not the creditor. The definition of a debt collector is as follows. 6. The term debt collector means any person who uses any instrumentality of interstate commerce or the mails in any business the principal purpose of which is the collection of any debts, or who regularly collects or attempts to collect, directly or indirectly, debts owed or due or asserted to be owed or due another. So when a collection agency is assigned, or has purchased, your debt, they are not the creditor, they are the debt collector, and the actions they take are all governed by the FDCPA. What if the person asking you for the money, Bob, is a lawyer? Under the FDCPA, even if Joe hires a law firm or lawyer to collect a debt from you, the law firm of lawyer is still considered a collector and must adhere to the FDCPA. What does a debt collector need to provide as debt validation? 1. Proof that the collection company owns the debt or has been assigned the debt. Bob is legally entitled to collect a debt he owns or has been assigned from you. This is basic contract law. It is very difficult to get a judgment without a direct contract between collection agency and the original creditor too. At a minimum, some account statements from the original creditor. You can pin them down on the amount of the debt by requiring complete payment history, starting with the original creditor. How did Bob calculate this alleged debt? What fees interest has Bob tacked on, and how he determined these amounts? This requirement was established by the case Fields v. Wilbur Law Firm, USCA, 02, C. 0072, 7th Circuit Court, September 2004. 3. Copy of the original wet ink signed loan agreement or credit card application. Your contract with Joe establishing the debt between him and you. Account statements from the original date can fulfill these requirements. What does Bob gets out of the deal? It used to be, in most cases, that creditors assigned, not sold, its debts to a collection agency, but not anymore. Creditors hire collection companies, like Bob, to collect debts for them, because they simply don't have the time or resources to chase down all of their severely overdue accounts. Collection agencies maintain cheap labor and a streamlined system to pursue such accounts. When a creditor hires a collection agency, the debt has been assigned to the collection agency. If a collection agency is successful at collecting the money on the account, they usually keep a percentage of what is collected as payment for services. Original creditors sometimes sell debts in large portfolios to collection agencies. This is starting to be the norm, and several of these companies, called junk debt buyers, JDBs, are now being traded on Wall Street. The companies do not spend much money for these debts, sometimes paying less than 1 cent on the dollar. Even if the debt is not a large debt, they often hire attorneys to send out mass form letters to debtors in the hopes of collecting. As you can see, even if they get a small percentage of the debtors to pay, profits can be enormous. Assigned or purchased debt. How do you know Bob is the right guy to pay? Why should you care if a debt is purchased or assigned? In an assignment, the collection agency does not own the debt, and therefore you do not technically owe them any money. There is no way for a collection agency to prove that you owe them money because there is only an assignment of the debt and not a contract between you and the creditor. One loophole. Some contracts have the wording debtor agrees to be responsible for payment of this debt to creditor or its assigns. This is a contract between you and the debt collector as well as the creditor, and if they can provide you with a copy of a contract that states this, with your wet ink signature, you are pretty much stuck and need to negotiate the debt. What if the collection agency, Bob, proves they purchased the debt? Is he now the original creditor and no longer subject to the FDCPA? If they do purchase the debt, this does not make them the original creditor. They are still a debt collector covered by the FDCPA. Continue to treat any collection agency, junk debt buyer or law firm who says they own the debt as a collection agency subject to the FDCPA. You can still request validation and proof of the purchase, because if they can't validate it, the collection agency can't prove you owe the debt. Often a JDB will lie telling a consumer that since they purchased the debt, they are not subject to the FDCPA. This simply not true. The right to validate your debt under the FDCPA, you are allowed to validate this debt, and the creditor, in this case, the collection agency, must show you proof that you owe the debt to the collection agency, not to the original creditor. Section 809. Validation of debts. 15 U.S.C. 1692 G. B. If the consumer notifies the debt collector in writing within the 30-day period described in subsection A, that the debt, or any portion thereof, is disputed, or that the consumer requests the name and address of the original creditor, the debt collector shall cease collection of the debtor, or any disputed portion thereof, until the debt collector obtains verification of the debt or any copy of a judgment, or the name and address of the original creditor, and a copy of such verification or judgment, or name and address of the original creditor, is mailed to the consumer by the debt collector. They also must show positive proof that you owe them this debt. It's not enough to send you a computer-generated printout of the debt. So, if a creditor can't validate a debt, they are not allowed to collect the debt, they are not allowed to contact you about the debt, and they are not allowed to report it under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, FCRA. Doing so is a violation of the FCRA, and the FCRA states that you can sue for $1,000 in damages for any violation of the Act. An opinion letter of the FTC clearly spells out that a collection agency cannot report a debt to the credit bureaus which has not been validated. http www.ftc.gov statutes pa letters cas htm. The opinion letter also states that you can sue in federal or state court. So if you have them on a violation, then you have damages of $1,000 for the incident plus damages. Small claims court. Anyone? What to do if a collection